This is Brendan Young, and this is going to be my midterm evaluation. And so, to begin, I'm going to kind of go over this mental map of all the concepts we've gone through so far in the web development lecture, and kind of give a high level overview of all of these concepts as well. And so, I think one of the best ways that I've kind of learned to conceptualize all of this content is through analogies. And so, I found that the best one that I've found is through a house analogy. And so to begin, we're going to start with the visible house, which is the front end, what the user sees and how they interact with the web page. So to begin, I'm going to talk about HTML5. So I like to think of HTML5 as the wood frame and the walls of your house. It defines where things go, such as like here's the living room, here's the bedroom, here's the door. It creates rooms with divs and sections, doors with links, windows with images, and labels with text and headings. Without HTML, you don't have any structure. It's just an empty lot. An example of this could be like a header, which is the entryway, main, which is the main living space or the living room, footer is the back porch. And the connection to web development as a whole, every other technology needs this framework to exist. Like, you can't paint walls when the walls do not exist, You can't wire electricity through nothing. And so the next concept was CSS, which is, you want to think of as like the interior designer who makes your house livable. You want your house to look beautiful and eye-pleasing to yourself, and that's what CSS does for us in web development. It paints the walls with colors, chooses the flooring with backgrounds, arranges furniture with layouts and positioning. It sets the lighting mood with shadows and transitions, and it makes things look more professional versus like an amateur kind of web page. And so how I draw the connection between CSS and everything else: CSS takes the bare wooden frame, which is HTML5, and makes it a home you'd actually want to live in and spend your time in. Without CSS, sure, your house has the walls and the frame, but it's kind of ugly. You don't want to live in a plain house. You can think of it like unpainted drywall. And so the next piece of content that we went through was Bootstrap. And so Bootstrap is like going to IKEA or using prefabricated components. Some kind of refer to them as reusable components as well. So instead of custom building every piece of furniture, which would be like writing CSS from scratch for everything, you can get ready-made components. And so you could get like a pre-designed kitchen, bathroom set, living room layout, and it allows for responsive design. So furniture that automatically adjusts for small apartments or large mansions. And it also allows for a grid system. You can think of that as like a floor plan template that ensures rooms are evenly sized. And so how does Bootstrap connect to all this? Bootstrap is built on top of CSS. So it's kind of like hiring an interior designer who brings a catalog of proven designs. And this saves massive time and allows you to ensure that your house looks modern and works on any appropriate size, as like all houses come in different sizes. And I kind of like to think of it as like, sometimes you don't always know what you want to do, whether it's like through a creative block or something. And so sometimes seeing what's already been done before and adding your own twist to things can be rather helpful. And so moving on, in between, you have our communication channel of phone lines and pipes. And so now we reach our interactivity layer, which is how we make everything come alive. And so the first concept I want to talk about is JavaScript. So I kind of think of JavaScript as kind of like the electric wiring, the smart home system and automation. It when you when you think of all this electrical wiring and all these like new smart home technologies and stuff, like for example, when you flip a light switch or click a button in the concept of web development, a light turns on, or in more general terms, something happens. Smart thermostats adjust temperature, which is how I kind of conceptualize the idea of dynamic content updates. Doorbell cameras show who's there. I want to think of that like fetching data and displaying it. Motion sensors trigger actions, which are, event listeners. Voice assistants process commands, which you can think of as like functions. And in the browser, so the client side JavaScript, it controls everything, that the homeowner can see and touch. As something like we've talked about before is like, based on who's the user, they may want to see something or maybe they shouldn't see something. It validates that you turned the lock the right way, which is form validation, unless you control lights from your phone. So interactive UI is kind of like what you want to think about. And so how JavaScript kind of connects to everything, JavaScript brings your static house to life. Without it, you have a really nice house, but nothing works. Light switches don't do anything when they're supposed to be. Doors don't open when they're supposed to. Thermostats are stuck on one temperature. And so the next one I want to talk about is forms, which you can kind of think of, as like the mailbox or the parcel delivery system. This is how residents send letters out, and that's kind of how I think about like submitting data to a server, getting responses back, or how they receive packages. Form fields such as like, for example, like a name, email, or message. This is how a delivery person needs proper addresses to send this to the correct places. And so validation is another big one. You want to think about like sometimes packages are rejected if the address is wrong. And so kind of a nice way to think about it is like HTML creates the mailbox, CSS makes the mailbox look nice or personalized, JavaScript checks the address before sending, and Express receives the mail on the other end. And so how, just to kind of like put the nail in the coffin here, how do forms kind of connect to everything? They're the primary communication channel between your house, which is the front end, the utility company, the back end. And every time you need something from outside of your house, you're going to use a form. And that's kind of how I'd like to think about this. So next, after the request and response pipeline that we kind of went over, now we're going to talk about the utility systems, which is the back end. And so we started, I believe, with Node.js. And so I kind of like to think of Node.js as like the power plant that generates electricity for the whole neighborhood. Your house runs on electricity, which if you remember, it kind of equated to like JavaScript. But, where does that electricity come from, right? And so this is where Node.js kind of comes in handy. Node.js allows JavaScript to run outside of the browser. On servers, the power plant, like I said. Before Node.js, JavaScript could really only run in-house, which by house I mean browsers, and not at the power plant, which is a server. And so like, why does this matter? It's the same language as JavaScript, but Node.js allows us to power both the house and the power plant. Developers can speak one language for everything, and you can write JavaScript to handle millions of different houses or web requests. And so how does this connect to everything? To just kind of tie it in, Node.js is the runtime environment. It's like the industrial infrastructure that lets JavaScript work at scale, handling requests from thousands of houses or users simultaneously. And so the next thing we went over was Express, which I kind of like to think of as like the smart utility routing and management system built on top of the power plant. So when you request water, for example, Express makes sure that it goes to your tap and not your neighbor's. When you turn on heat, Express routes the gas to your furnace and not someone else's, right? And it has some, I kind of like to think of it as like a switchboard, which is like a route or routes, that directs requests to the right place. And it also has middleware, which I kind of like to think of as like safety inspectors that check requests before processing them, right? Because we always want to be protecting ourselves when we're developing. And so, what does Express really do? It handles routes. So for example, when someone knocks on the front door, think of like the get route. Answer like this. For handling forms when mail arrives, think of like posting. It processes it and stores it, serves files. So when someone needs a blueprint or HTML file, send it. Talks to storage, retrieving the stored documents from the basement, or as we'll talk about in a second, MongoDB or databases. And so how does this kind of connect to the whole picture we painted so far? Express makes Node.js organized, right? So without Express, Node.js is just like a raw power plant. But Express is the control panel that kind of makes it usable and controllable. It's the difference between, I guess if you want to think about it, like a power plant with no organization versus one with smart routing. And so that leads us to our final part of the foundation of storage, or the database. And so the analogy that I've got to come up with MongoDB is that it's kind of like our secure basement storage where we're going to keep everything valuable, like a safe, for example, like user profiles, or you could think of like family photos, application data, which could be like important documents, database collections, or collections of items, organized in boxes or like JSON documents, instead of filing cabinets, which would be like, for example, like a SQL table. Flexible storage, boxes can hold different things. And so I think like a really important part that I also wanted to touch on was like why MongoDB with JavaScript. And so it stores data in JSON format, which is native to JavaScript, which is very easy and useful for parsing purposes. So you want to think of it as like storing your JavaScript objects directly in boxes without translation, because you don't need to translate it, and NoSQL, which is another big part, allows for flexible boxes versus rigid filing cabinets. The more flexible things are, the more you're able to manipulate them. And so how does this last part connect to everything, right? When someone fills out a form or mailbox, Express processes it, which is our utility system, if you remember, and it stores it permanently in MongoDB, which is, what we just talked about, our basement. And so when we need it later, Express goes down to the basement, or MongoDB, retrieves it, and sends it back up to your house or your browser. And so the next thing I want to kind of go over is my deep dive into a certain concept. And so something I really wanted to kind of talk about a little bit more was Express. And so I'll kind of scroll up a little bit to have this up. And so let's dive a little deeper into Express. So remember, from what we talked about with the housing analogy, Express is the utility management system. But, we talk about it at a high level, but what does that really mean? And so Express is a web framework built on top of Node.js, the power plant. And so the way I kind of want to think about it is Node.js gave us the ability to run JavaScript on server. And that's like having a power plant, but without Express, we're building a web server with raw Node.js is like manually connecting every wire in your house by hand. Like, sure, you could do that, but who wants to do that, And so Express gives us a clean and organized way to kind of handle different types of requests. So you want to think about like your get, post, put, delete. It organizes our code into routes, processes data from coming from forms, serves files to browsers, connects to databases, and so much more, and so I think like something I also wanted to talk about quickly was like, it's called a framework because it provides the structure and the tools we need, but we still, need to write the specific logic for our application. And so one of the first core concepts of Express is routing. So this is like pretty much the first core concept of it. And so routing is like how we tell our server when someone visits this URL, do this thing. Thinking back, to our housing analogy, when someone knocks on the front door, you might answer a little differently than if they knocked on your back door. When the mailman comes, you handle that differently than when like an Uber Eats driver comes to deliver food. And so the next concept I kind of want to go over is middleware. And this is like where the power of Express really, really kind of shows itself. Middleware are functions that have access to the request and response objects, and they run before your route handlers. You want to think of it as like a inspector or a security guard or processor, and it's going to check and modify the requests as they kind of flow throughout your application. Kind of going back to our housing analogy again, like imagine before the mail reaches you, it goes through several checkpoints, which you would hope it does. The first checkpoint, is this package addressed correctly? Second checkpoint, is this package safe? Like not a bomb, for example, or something. Third checkpoint, does this package need to be logged for whatever reason? And finally, delivering it to the person. And so the next concept of Express that I want to go over is request and response objects. And so request objects kind of contain everything about what the client asked for. The parameters, query, body, headers, and cookies set by the browsers. The response object is how we're going to send data back to the user. So sending any data, whether it's HTML, text, etc. JSON, sending the JSON data. Rendering a template if we're using like template engines. Redirect, which is going to reroute you to a different page. And status, which is going to kind of like set the HTTP status code, whether it's like an error code or success code. And so these objects are what really make Express powerful. They give us easy access to everything we need in an efficient manner. And so kind of like putting it all together, the request and response cycle, where we start with a user action. So they click on a link or submit data through a form. Browser sends HTTP request, goes to your Express server. Express receives requests, creating, requests and response objects. Middleware pipeline, which is where requests flow through all the middleware, parsing JSON data, logging the requests, checking authentication, route matching. Express, finds the matching route or where to go, and then route handler executes. Your code runs. Maybe it's to query a database or process data or prepare a response for the user, and then it sends the response back to the browser, and then the browser displays the response. And all this happens in milliseconds. And Express is really powerful in the sense that it can handle thousands of these cycles like all at once. And so that's kind of like the deeper dive of Express and kind of how I like to think of it. And so next be my live coding demo of kind of like everything we talked about with Express. And so I think like a pretty simple demo could be of a contact form. So we're gonna make a JS file, which is where we're gonna have our live coding. And so, let's pretend we're building a real Express server from scratch. This app object is like the heart of our server. So, to start, we're gonna need to always start with importing Express and creating our application instance. So we're gonna go const express equals require express. We're gonna pretend we don't see that AI is trying to tell us what to do because we want to do this on our own. And so we create app now, express. All right. So now, when you set up our middleware, remember, our middleware runs before our routes. And so there's 3 pieces of middleware that are really essential for Express apps. Parsing JSON data. I guess let's back up. So, middleware functions kind of process every request, from parsing JSON data or data in general so we can easily access it, making sure they're running in order like a pipeline, or things like logs or stuff like that. So let's start with middleware section 1, parsing JSON data. So we're gonna go app.use middleware. App.use express.json, and then section 2. Would be like, parsing. I think AI wants to do it for me, but we're going to talk about this out loud. Let's say parsing URL encoded data. So like getting form data, for example, for our contact form demo. So let's go parsing form data, or URL encoded data. App.use express.URL encoded, if I could spell that correctly. And so another thing I kind of want to mention, I would say setting extended to true is something I kind of wanted to mention. And so, setting it as true lets us parse more complex objects. Not everything that we're handling in terms of data is going to be all nice and uniform and pretty. So I think that's something I want to also bring up. So section 3 of middleware. And so, we also want to serve static files from a public folder, in the sense, that it's content open to be shown to any user. So serving static files from a public folder. We'll leave that in quotations. App.use express.static. Let's say public. Sure, that looks good. All right. And so now we're going to talk about routes. Let's leave this in all caps. Right, and so routes, right? So we're going to create our routes. The first one I kind of want to talk about is the get route. It's going to serve as like our HTML form. When users visit like / something or like an endpoint, they get this HTML that they're going to see. And so, for example, so I'm going to comment get route, and then we're going to go app.get /request response equals points to And so, requests have all of the request info, and response allows us to send that data back. So we're going to go response.send, and then let's get that out the way because that was really in my face. And so let's do doc type HTML because that's where we're going to get it from. And so HTML. Oh, oopsies. Let's do that. Instead of you. And then we're going to go head. Send it a little lower. And so typically I kind of like to break things up with line breaks just because it kind of allows for some better readability. So we're going to contact us, title for the contact form. Let's go style, body, put some font family, Arial, just because I find it to be a little bit more readable, a little easier on the eyes. Max width of 500 pixels, margin 50 pixels, input text area width 100% width. Sorry, too used to Python at the moment. Padding, we're gonna go 10 pixels. Margin 10 pixels. Yeah, that looks good. And then I'm gonna add a button. Let's say padding 20 pixels. Background, let's go. Yeah, there we go. Color, let's go white. Border, none. Make that a little bit more readable. And then we'll close style here. And then we'll close the head here. And so, just kind of try to do this in order to kind of keep everything, no spoilers. Yeah, just kind of keep everything much more readable. And then, if anyone needs to read my code or something like that or fix it, then it's just that much easier. Let's go header 1, contact us. Guess AI really wants to do it for us, but we're gonna do this one on our own. So contact us, close header 1, form method equals post the data, action equals slash, need a quotation mark, slash contact, yeah, and so, note that the form posts to this contact endpoint, and so, kind of like what we talked about earlier with Express, this is allowing us to kind of dictate where all this data is going to go. So next we're going to go input type equals text, name equals name, no commas needed, placeholder, name. I'm gonna set that to required, so we require this data and put like, no spoilers. Input type equals email. What else? Name equals email. Placeholder will go your email. And of course required. And then text area. Name equals message. Placeholder. Some message. Do your message. Rows, we'll do 4, and then required, close that, and we'll do close text area, and then button type equals submit, and send message button. Then close that. And close form. Nope. And then close the body. Send this down here for my own sake and readability. Alright. Right, and so, just to reiterate, notice that post, again, is pointing to this contact endpoint. And that means, when the form is submitted, it's going to send a post request to our /contact route. So now, this is kind of I would say the meat and potatoes of this. Sorry, I just so one of the more important parts, how are we going to handle the form submission? And so what we're going to do is create a post route that receives the form data, processes it, and sends the response we're looking for here. So sure, post route. We're not gonna do it the way you are telling me to do it, though, Mr. AI. Get. No, sorry. App.post. And so go /contact. Request response. And so I guess kind of before I go ahead, what is this kind of doing? So we're, again, receiving the form data, request body, which I'll show you in a second, has our parsed form fields. We're going to log it, and in production, we'd save it to MongoDB, and then we send a personalized thank you message for our contact form, let's say. So let's see. Let's go const name email message equals body. And so, like I said, we're gonna log this. We're gonna log what we received. receive, and so this is always gonna just be good practice to show that we're getting the data properly. What does it say? Yeah, I like the way this log looks. That way we can kind of tell. And then, so now in a real application, this is kind of where things are gonna get saved to MongoDB, and I'll leave a comment here. Save to MongoDB. I guess like an example line of logic would be like contact equals awaits contact create. And so you'll add name message. Yep, that looks good. That is rude of you to be stealing my thunder, and we're not going to do it that way anyways, right? And so I guess what I generated was also logging, which is a great idea as well. And so now we need to send a success response back to the browser, just so the user is aware that that it worked out properly. Browser res.send. And then get doc type, HTML. So we know where it belongs. We're going to say thank you for your submission. Close title, style. Again, dictating this behavior that we're looking for here. Font family. Area, and you're kind of starting to get the picture. So 500 pixels again. Let's go margin 50 pixels. Auto text align. Let's center this message. Success is gonna, typically success is green, so let's do that, which oh my god, I hate when this happens. And we'll close style here, and then we're gonna go body. Message received. And then close head 1. Thanks. We need the name. $sign. Yep. $sign name. We will respond to their email soon. Close that. close our body. Close our HTML. And so, like, notice that we're using template literals here, addressing them by the specific name and email that is associated with this run. And so it's just like, all about user experience, but also error handling, logging, making sure, everything is going where it's supposed to go, when it's supposed to go. And so that's generally all you really need to kind of get started with Express. I hope that my live demo was easy to follow and the documentation helped. Thank you so much for your time and listening to me rant about how important I find Express. I think I need to close that one out. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.